Hello, everybody. Just some background information on my guest before we get started. Alissa Mayer is a certified equine Hanna Somatics educator and the co-instructor of the Equine Hanna Somatics professional training and certification program. She is the creator of the FEEL-Embodied system. Alissa explained to me what a pandiculation is. She talked about the intricacies, the tremendous intricacies of the nervous system in humans and in horses and in everything. We talked about how to influence the unconscious resting tone of your muscles and how that plays into your posture versus the performance of posture. All very interesting stuff, and I hope you really enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me here again on Putting the Horse First. My name is Isabeau, and my guest today is Alissa Mayer, and she's going to tell us about some really cool stuff. Apparently, she has a technique for teaching horses to stand on three legs for shoeing and trimming, which when I heard about, I was so excited. That would be very interesting. I've studied straightness training and balance, but the idea of how I would even approach standing a horse on three legs for trimming, I hadn't even thought about. So that would be a great topic in addition to whatever she wants to talk about. Alissa, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Isabeau. Thanks for having me here. And it's Alissa Mayer, by the way.
Alissa Mayer. Gotcha. Okay.
Not
cool.
Meyer. Yeah. That's okay. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I can't wait to tell you how to help horses stand more easily on three legs, but I will give a little bit of an intro.
Okay.
The short version, I have worked with horses, I guess my whole life. I started riding when I was 4, like so many of us horse crazy girls and ladies start out. I didn't come from a horsey family, so I really have to give credit to my mom for even at that young age finding horses for me because I was clearly obsessed with them from the beginning. She says I was probably a horse in a past life or something. I grew up riding once a week or taking lessons once a week. And then I started volunteering at a therapeutic riding stable where I became the person who would test out the new horses and help train them into the therapy program. I was probably 14 when I started training those horses and then teaching lessons and helping supervise the volunteers there. And I guess that's when I started teaching. I never really thought of myself as a teacher or thought I would be one because I used to get really frustrated trying to explain things to people who weren't coming from the same place as me or didn't see things that I could see. So I never really thought I'd become an instructor or something. But then over the years, I just kept working with horses and people would have questions. And if I could help, I would. And that led to me. I studied an equine science program in college because I just couldn't stay away from horses. So I ended up finishing out my degree doing that. Cool. But it was a pretty traditional program. And I feel like I learned all the things I don't want to do with horses in that world or how not to do it. And I always found myself in these interesting situations where there was a riding program component to my university program. And I did not advance at all in the years that I was there through their program. However, I was in some of the advanced level riding courses and they always gave me the most difficult horses to ride, which looking back, I can see no one else could ride these horses, or it was a horse who wouldn't stand still to be mounted without 2 people on a bucket of grain or something. But I could ride these horses because I approached them differently, which I didn't really understand how different that was for the horses then. I learned a lot. So no matter what, and I still say this when people ask me whether they should go to a certain clinic or watch a certain workshop or take a certain training, I always say yes, because there's always something you're going to learn. Whatever it is you're going to, you're either going to learn stuff you want to do and learn more about, or you're going to learn how you don't want to do things or things that you never want to do to your horse. Anyway, I'm trying to make this the short version. So I studied horses at university. I worked for several years as a professional groom for eventing and dressage horses in different places in the US and in Europe. And I moved from job to job because it usually was just a few weeks or a couple of months at a place before I'd bump up against something ethically that didn't work for me, that was kind of standard practice at a particular barn or with a particular trainer. And it wasn't my place. So I didn't make the rules. I wasn't in a position to make big changes. And so I would have to leave and find a new job and try to help horses wherever I could. Because where I'm coming from and all the stuff that I do is I really want to help the horses. Horses are not in a great place a lot of our horses today. You know, they're not having the best living conditions, or they're not being treated as maybe they deserve to be treated, and that's nobody's fault really. It's just the state of the industry. And I'm glad that we're seeing a shift to more awareness around treating horses as individuals and making sure their needs are met and communicating with them rather than just training them or using them for things.
For sure.
So anyway, I did that for a long time and ended up teaching lessons to help finance my horse habit, because I started accumulating horses at a certain point. And you can't have just one. I used my my boyfriend's horse at the time when I was living in Hawaii to teach lessons to people who were interested in learning, because he was a real safe horse. And I started coming across horses that needed help. I learned how to do barefoot trimming because we only had a horseshoer there. So I had to learn how to become my own barefoot trimmer if I wanted my horses to be barefoot. And then I learned that they needed more different living situations. So I built a paddock paradise track for them on our place there, and then started boarding horses and ended up rehabbing horses, because most horses have hoof problems and horses are not sound and need help, it turns out, you know. So I started doing that and learned everything I could to do that. And had this experience that I think a lot of horsewomen, horse people in general who love horses and who end up kind of taking horses on to rehab or to help them because we can't help ourselves. And we do everything we know and learn, and we get them body work, and we're changing their diet and doing all the things. And the horses get better, but they never really get all the way better. They never get all the way sound or all the way straight, or never really live up to the potential that we see in them. And they hit a plateau usually. And then you have to repeat all the stuff or try to help them again, or they backslide. And I was in that cycle of buying horses for $1 that was somebody else's failure, or was too dangerous or scary for somebody, and rehabbing them to a certain point. And then I had this amazing experience, which at the time seemed like a coincidence, but looking back, I think maybe it was the universe trying to show me something. And I learned something called Hanna Somatics, and that changed everything. Changed everything in the way I could help horses, changed the way that I taught people to ride, changed the way I understood my own body and the nervous system. And it gave me an answer that solves almost all of the things I had previously been hired to do as a professional horse trainer, problem solver, body worker, which was really exciting. And that was 2010. So more than 13 years ago. I have not looked back since. And that is what I teach now, because it is such a powerful way to improve the functioning of the neuromuscular system, which is what I have found is behind almost every problem that horses have, or that we have with horses. And even with our own bodies, being able to sit properly and have good body awareness, and be able to follow the instructions of an instructor who's teaching us something, to actually be able to do what you're being told to do with your body. There's a way to make that easier. And I think I found it, and it's called Hanna Somatics. So that is what I'm going to explain to you to help horses be able to balance more on three legs. The answer to that is it's a kind of like a nervous system hack that we can help our horses with.
Can I ask just for a quick, so how is that spelled? Is it Hanno Somatics?
Hanna Somatics, Somatics. Somatics has become a really popular word, so you're familiar with that one, I think. But Hanna is the last name of Thomas Hanna, who he's the guy who coined the term somatics to describe the mind-body integration field. And his method of somatics is a very specific way of working with the nervous system of a person or of a horse, versus there's now all these other kinds of somatics that have popped up, especially in the last, it feels like 4 or 5 years, where that word is being used to describe all sorts of stuff, from the field of psychology to dance to anything that has to do with the body, or to experiencing, or when I'm using it, I'm talking about something really specific. I think the balancing on 3 legs thing is a great context to explain what the work is and how it can benefit. Everybody talks about the nervous system and the horse's brain and the human brain now. And the nervous system is so wildly complex. It is a system of systems. And I feel like not even the people who study the nervous system and the brain, the neuroscientists, they don't even really understand how it all works. So what I find really interesting is there are all these training programs and practitioner training kind of methods that are popping up that are saying they're working with the nervous system, or working on the nervous system, or retraining the nervous system, that kind of thing. And it's such a vast topic. It's so potentially complex, depending on which part of it you're talking about. I feel like they're jumping the gun a little bit in a lot of times. And of course, yes, everything we do involves the nervous system. It's impossible not to, because that's your brain and your spinal cord and how everything works. You can't
Yeah.
not involve the nervous system. To claim to be retraining it or to claim to understand it to the point that you can influence it, I think is kind of a lot. And I hear people talking about it, and I happen to be someone who, like, I don't have a PhD in neuroscience, but I do study the nervous system and the brain a lot. And it is central to the work that I do. And I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the specific part that I work with that allows me to explain it in a way that makes sense. And I think that's really important, that we understand the mechanics of it if we're going to try to work with it in a beneficial way, understand things that are happening in the nervous system that then present as something like a horse who has trouble standing on 3 legs. A lot of the time, a horse can't stand on 3 legs very long or very well for some involuntary reasons. Like there is a whole bunch of involuntary reflexes that get triggered when we're handling horses' legs that result in the horse yanking their leg away and stomping it back down, for example. Right? That isn't actually behavior. It's an involuntary reflex that happens before the horse's brain even knows it's happening. It's like a spinal cord level response to stimulation on the skin, to stretching a muscle, to the horse losing balance and needing to regain balance. And we used to, and oftentimes still respond to that as a behavior that can be trained. So we'll tell a horse to quit it, or sometimes the horse will get smacked on the shoulder if they do that, or we'll pick their foot right up again right away. So they're not getting away with it. I'm doing air quotes. I think if most people, especially people who work with hooves, and that's every horse owner, not just hoof care practitioners, right? But if they understood what those reflexes are and what triggers them, we could work with that in a much more effective way to either avoid them or help the horse not be so easily triggered. And that would really help us, the human part of the equation, to not get yanked or stomped on or frustrated when we're working with horses.
I like this a lot. Yes, my own gelding, the 17-hand Dutch warmblood guy, was very sensitive about his feet when I first got him. Luckily, I took some Casey LaPierre clinics in the early 2000s. Some of the best money I ever spent learning how to trim my own horses, and saved me a fortune. I wouldn't have had anybody try to trim him at that point. He would occasionally put his belly on the floor. He was so upset about his feet. He's much better now. He's really good now. I work with a trimmer now to help me because I'm not a pro, even though I can trim him. I'm not a professional, but he has just this residual little grabby, yanky kind of a thing. And it's not even something he's doing. Try to work on having him lower his foot slowly, but it's an involuntary thing. As soon as he picks his foot up, his weight shifts a bit, very slight, and I don't even think he knows he's doing it. I've been curious about that. So it sounds like you're exactly right in the range where I've been wondering, what do I do about this here?
I hope I'll be able to give you some tools you can work with. The first thing that we can think about is that the individual with the best chance of picking up a horse's foot and holding it up is the horse. Most of the time, that's not what I see happening, right? Most of the time, the person is doing some or almost all of the work of getting that hoof picked up. And the problem with that is, if we take the whole confidence issue aside, because that is, of course, a piece that is relevant, is that if a horse doesn't trust you or doesn't feel safe in their environment, they don't want to pick up one of their feet because then they can't flee from danger, right? So there's a confidence issue there, but that's not really what I want to talk about right now. I think people are pretty familiar with that. But if the horse's brain doesn't have time to organize its body to rebalance, shift its weight away from that leg and pick it up for you, then of course they're going to lose their balance and need to put it back down when you pick up that leg. Just like if I walked up to you and you're standing there and I pick up one of your legs, you're going to have to put your hand against the wall or something, or on my shoulder and lean on me to retain your balance. And then you're going to have to, it's going to be hard for you on one leg to then after the fact find your balance. And it also probably degrades your trust with me a little bit because I did that to you.
Gotcha.
So most of the time we're setting ourselves up to have a less than ideal situation for both of us when we go in and pick the horse's foot up too fast, or when we do it for the horse or to the horse.
Okay.
And that can include using some of these conditioned responses that we teach our horses. Like if we were to go pinch the chestnut or snap our fingers or use a verbal cue, once that cue is learned, it's not necessarily a voluntary response from the horse anymore. So even doing it nicely or in a way that it has been trained can throw the horse off balance, because they need to have time to form something called a motor plan. That is something that happens in the brain when in between you deciding to do something and your body doing the thing you decided to do, your brain forms a motor plan where it's like an organizational flow chart of all of the things that your body has to do to be able to do the thing that you decided you're about to do. And if you don't have time to form that motor plan, which for a horse to pick up a foot involves awareness that that's going to happen, involves having to shift their weight to the other 3 legs and to the other side, like their center of gravity has to shift away. It involves engaging a bunch of core muscles and lifting the back, which is something we love to have our horses do anyway. Then they have to actually activate the flexor muscles on the appropriate limb and then pick up the foot. They need to be able to do all of those things to feel comfortable doing it, for the movement to happen accurately, and then for them to be able to stay there. And we get in the way of that process by asking them to do it too quick, by pushing on them with our shoulder, and by being kind of demanding, or by physically pulling up the foot and holding it for them, which, as we all know, if you are willing to hold the weight of your horse's leg, they'll let you hold it and they'll lean on you and they'll be like, great, you be my leg. That's fine. But that doesn't work very well for us wimpy little humans down there with our trimming tools or whatever we're doing. So that's not a great thing to set up either, because as soon as we get tired and let it go, then they're losing balance. We're losing balance. Somebody's going to get hurt. And it's nice to know that the horse's brain and nervous system, they know how to lift up their own leg, and their best chance at doing that is if you let them do it. We have to be able to ask them to do that, and they have to understand what we want. We have to wait a little bit for them to do it, but then also they need to be able to do it. So a lot of times horses are physically compromised in some way that makes it either difficult or uncomfortable for them to pick up one leg or sometimes all of their legs. So there's this whole other thing where maybe they have an old injury, maybe their other hoof is sore that we're asking them to put their weight on, or maybe they just have some chronic tension that pretty much every person and every horse I've ever met has some of, that gets in the way of their body moving as well and as comfortably as it used to or as it could. And so my go-to kind of the attitude I come to it with is, if a horse can't pick up their foot, it's because they can't, not because they won't. And then I want to find out, why can't they? Is it because I asked them too quickly and they didn't have time to organize their own body? Is it because they didn't understand what I was asking? Is it because there's physically something going on that's preventing them from doing it? And it's almost always one of those things. The first potential solution is to just slow down and make sure that we're letting the horse do the work, whatever kind of form that takes, because that's going to depend on the individual and on what sort of language and vocabulary and training is already in place between that person and that horse. Slow down, let the horse do most of the work. And then the way we actually ask them or help them pick up their foot if they're having trouble, and especially the way we help them put it back down, is actually going to solve a lot of the physical reasons that they are not able to do it for us if they're having trouble. And that's where Hanna Somatics comes in. So Hanna Somatics, I'll tell you real quick what it is it's a way of working with a mind-body unit. So that could be a horse or a person. It works with all mammals, actually, which is really exciting, to get them to activate a natural reflex called pandiculation. And pandiculation is the reflex that we're already hardwired with from birth. It's built into our nervous system. And what it does is it allows us to reset our resting muscle tension levels. And if you know what resting muscle tension is, this is going to be an exciting moment. If you don't know what it is, I hope I'll explain it so you can get excited with us. But resting muscle tension or resting muscle tonus is what creates and defines posture. And it's very hard to change if you don't know how to change it, because it's mediated by the unconscious parts of the brain. And it's supposed to be, because it's part of the autopilot system that keeps us upright against gravity, or that keeps a horse upright, and that allows the whole physical body, right, the structure of the skeleton and then the muscles and the connective tissue to all work together to keep the body upright without us having to consciously do that, right? We have a pretty complex autopilot system, thank goodness, that knows how to do that because we don't know how to do that. The conscious brain has no idea how to organize the anatomy to stand upright or to do fine motor movements. You guys can't see us, but Isabeau is touching her lip or her chin right now with her hand. And so your brain was able to form a motor plan to do that when you decided to go like, and to put your hand on your face without smacking you in the face, right?
Gotcha.
Without missing your face completely, without hurting your hand, right? It knows, because it's programmed into the system, exactly which muscles to activate with exactly how much activation in what sequence, and which muscles to inhibit to allow other muscles to contract and to allow your joints to move, so that you could do that exact perfect movement and touch your chin with the exact perfect amount of pressure that you had in mind for that moment, right? That's really complicated. And we don't know how to do that. And horses certainly don't know how to do that, the conscious part of us. So the way that our body regulates that movement and our range of motion, and particularly our posture, is by maintaining a baseline level of muscle activation. That's what keeps us being able to sit up or stand up instead of just being like in a puddle on the floor. Like, you can't actually be totally relaxed because you wouldn't be up at all anymore, right? You'd be a puddle on the floor. And so when that resting muscle tone gets elevated, which happens naturally as a consequence of just daily living, stress, trauma, repetitive motion, things like that, we accumulate tension just living our life. We probably have some in our shoulders right now, or in our low back. If you're part of the 85% of the adult population that has low back pain, we all have some of that tension. And that's when the resting muscle tone has become elevated. And that same thing happens to horses, depending on their experience, their training, how well their tack fits, how often they're trailered, all of that stuff. Whatever happens to them, their resting muscle tone also kind of gets out of whack. And that we have a reflex designed to fix that, and it's called pandiculation. And you guys know what pandiculation is, actually, even if you don't recognize the word.
Oh, okay.
Because you do it. But also you've seen animals do it.
Okay.
So the first thing that a cat or a dog or a horse does after they take a nap is what?
Get up and they stretch a little bit. Well, horses might shake, or if you're a cat, they stretch.
Yeah, for sure. You see it with the dogs and cats. Horses usually will shake also, right? But yeah, so they'll do those full body kind of funny stretches, right? Where they'll do like a downward dog looking thing, or they'll stretch both forelimbs out and they arch their spine, or they'll do it with their neck, or see them do it with one leg sometimes, a foreleg or hind
for sure.
leg.
Yep.
You see cats do it, especially where they'll stretch out, and you'll see like each toe on their paw extend. Usually they're yawning when they do it. That's a pandiculation. It's not a stretch.
Okay.
It's a specific reflex called pandiculation. And instead of stretching, what they're doing is they're actually contracting a bunch of extensor muscles. So that's what gives us what looks like a stretch, but it's really a muscle contraction and then a slow, luxurious decontraction. So you don't have to understand any of that stuff of like what it is or how it works to be able to help your horse do one, which is really exciting. I sometimes go a little down like the rabbit hole of the neuroscience and stuff behind this stuff. So stop me if it gets a little too much in that direction, because I find that stuff fascinating.
No, I think that was a really good explanation.
In our modern day life, or in modern domestic horse life, stress and trauma and repetitive motion and injury is happening faster than our natural system can keep up with, because neither horses nor us humans are really living in a natural environment anymore. We have modified our environment faster than our nervous system can evolve to catch up.
Yeah.
And so that is why my personal belief and my observation is that that's why we're seeing such an epidemic of lameness in horses and pain in people. And it's not just lameness and pain. It's kind of a specific chronic recurring shifting leg lameness or stubborn back pain or postural issues that just keep coming back. That kind of issue. It's like it's everywhere. And that's because it's the unconscious muscle tone that's been accumulated, this tension that is distorting the body or restricting us from moving. And almost all of the training, treatments, therapies, that we have to try and address these things come more from either the conscious end of doing conscious relaxation training or conscious posture work, for example. And you guys listening can do this too. So everybody sit up straight. Well, you're supposed to. And as you're holding your good posture, I want you to think about a couple of things. One is feel into your body and think about what muscles does it take for you to have good posture? Because most of us were not sitting with good posture before I said that. I guarantee it.
We were not.
Right? So right now what we're doing is we are performing good posture. It doesn't really mean that we have good posture, but we're performing good posture. We can all do that. Horses can do this too. You know how a really good rider gets on a horse, picks up the reins, and all of a sudden your horse is round and gorgeous. And you're like, how come he doesn't do that for me? But then they let go and the horse also kind of falls apart. So we can ask horses to perform good posture, just like we can do it. Now, I'm still holding it. If you guys are still holding it, the muscles involved are probably starting to fatigue a little bit. So I want you to relax now. Let it go.
Yep.
Okay. Now, this is your actual posture. Right?
That's down.
I know. It kind of sucks, but it's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. What's happening, I want to explain what's happening in our bodies because this is really important. When you perform good posture and then when you relax, wherever your body goes back to when you relax, that is defined by the baseline level of muscle tone that you have all the time. That's your resting muscle tone. For most of us, when we did that, we slumped forward. Yeah. And that's because most of us have an accumulation of extra unconscious tension in our pectoral muscles on the front of our chest and in our abdominal muscles. And this could be from lots of different things. Whatever it is, we've accumulated tension on the front of our body, whether that's from, having a stressful childhood and repeatedly being spooked and startled and curling into the fetal position, right? Whether that's from being obsessed with having a six pack and a ripped core muscles and doing lots of core training where you curl and crunch and you train to shorten the front of your body. Like anything that you repeat enough, whether it's intentional or environmental, becomes incorporated into your baseline tension levels. And that's why most of us slump forward. It's just because there's tension pulling you there. You can override it when you perform. No problem. We have a system for that in our nervous system. That's so that no matter what state you're in, when a tiger jumps at you, you can perform and get the heck out of there in a pinch. You can override your own tension patterns, your own trauma, your own injury, your own pain briefly when you need to survive. But as soon as that intense effort or that focus, like as soon as your riding instructor is no longer reminding you to pull your shoulders back, as soon as you're not asking the horse to engage anymore, they fall back to their pattern, their habit. And that's defined by that resting muscle tone. So when I hear people talking about posture, people are talking about posture a lot right now, which I'm really excited about, but they talk about posture as if it's a choice. And it isn't really. The performance part is a choice.
Okay.
But you can train and train your performance posture as much as you want. It doesn't ever cross over into changing your habitual posture, which is based on that resting muscle tone, simply because it's two different parts of the brain.
Gotcha. Tricky. Okay.
That's why no matter how good we are at like fixing the body or doing body work or doing even, you do straightness training, right? You train and train that stuff. But for most of the time, it seems like the patterns are still under there. If you don't keep training or you don't keep fixing them or you don't keep adjusting or you don't keep doing the core stuff, they sneak back.
Absolutely.
They're not really sneaking back. It's just they were there the whole time. You were just layering performance over the top. So what we need, and I'm not saying we don't need to do that because we do want to train our performance ability and we do want to train our strength, but we also need to be helping our body adjust the baseline tension so that they're not at odds.
Awesome. All right. So how do you do that?
Right? This is my message. There's an easy way to adjust that baseline resting tension level. We can do what we normally do as an involuntary reflex, that pandiculation reflex after we wake up or the cat uncurls from their nap. We can do that voluntarily and it activates the same neural pathway and activates the same resetting of that resting muscle tension level as when we do it automatically. So we can strategically reset the resting level of muscle tone in our whole body, in our horse's whole body, by helping that body and brain unit do pandiculation. And that's what we do in Hanna Somatics.
So for a human, we would just do it ourselves. We pretend we're stretching in the morning.
There's two ways that we do it in human practice. So one way is, especially since COVID, we teach over Zoom a lot with our human clients because yes, I can explain to you what to do and then you can do it with your body because this only works. Hanna Somatics only works if you use your own brain to move your own body. So even when we do our one-on-one in-person Hanna Somatics sessions, if you came to my office and you laid out on a massage table and I helped guide you through a session, I would still be asking you to move your own body. But then since I'm there in person, I can show you something if you don't understand, or if you have an area of, say, skewed body awareness or a lack of awareness or numbness in your body, which is often the case. I can physically, through touch or through guiding you through a range of motion, show you what it feels like or where it is, so that you can then do a pandiculation where you use your own brain to do it. Because if I use my brain to do it, you're only receiving sensory input about something.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yes.
And the trick to pandiculation is you have to have the motor output combined with the sensory input, and then your brain has to compare. That's how it makes real changes. If it just gets sensory input, then it's just getting a snapshot of where you are in time, which is useful. That's the proprioceptive information and the sensory information that we get from manual therapies or adjustments or anything that happens to our body. We get a picture of where it is, but because we're not actively using it, the brain doesn't really do much with that information. But if you first have an idea, I'm going to pick up my hoof, and then you form the motor plan and you go to do it and you pick up your hoof. And by picking up your hoof, you lose your balance and you have to slam your hoof back down. You get a ton of information from your vestibular system. You lost your balance, and then the proprioceptive information through the sensory receptors when your leg stomped down. And then there's a bunch of other things happening in the muscles and the joints. Like there's all this information coming in. So I had an idea. I'm going to pick up my foot. I did it, and this is what happened. Was that my plan? And what can I do differently next time? Without the complete feedback loop and the ability to compare the plan with the outcome, the brain can't make any real changes to what it's going to do next time. So that's why it's so important that you use your own brain to move your body. Or if we're going to guide a horse doing equine Hanna somatics, we need to get the horse to use their own brain to move their own body if we want this to work. Otherwise, we can still get a release kind of result doing the somatic exercises, but it will be a temporary result because the horse's brain didn't actually make a shift. We just did something to the tissues of the body by doing a movement, and that will shift something temporarily. But then the pattern in the brain is still there.
Well, that makes complete sense to me. I mean, when I think about the difference between when a riding instructor uses the student as kind of a marionette on the back of a horse, and the student doesn't actually learn anything, the riding instructor just kind of tells the student, do this, do this. But as soon as the riding instructor leaves, the student possibly hasn't learned anything because they actually kind of do it themselves. The instructor kind of remote controlled them. And also one of the rider mechanic system that I spent a lot of years in, that is one of her core things is about you being able to map your own route. She would say, Paris is a place, but everybody's going to get there in a slightly different way. One of us is going to go out our door, we're going to turn right. The other person's going to go out their door and turn left. And we're all going to Paris, but you have to find your way through your territory, not your instructor try to impose their idea of how you should move onto you. So my horse doesn't speak English well, because English is not great.
Right.
So are you talking about using fresh release, positive reinforcement, just having them walk over objects and around objects? How are you influencing them? No, okay.
None of that will work.
None. Okay.
Nope. And that's what all of our other tools are, right? That's why the patterns keep coming back, is because almost all the tools we have in the entire horse industry, not that I know everything, but I mean that I've seen in my career so far, are working it's either not working with the whole neuromuscular system, or it's kind of focusing on just one end or the other. You've got to be able to non-verbally, like you said, ask the horse to do something very specific. And then we have to, with our hands, because so you have to, with horses have to be hands-on to be able to do this work. So I could over Zoom or something, I can coach you to do this with your own horse, but I can't just have a horse on the other end of the Zoom call because they don't speak English. But so basically to achieve a pandiculation, that is a true pandiculation that starts and ends inside the horse's brain, you've got to invite the horse to pick up their own foot. And then, now this is really, really key, they have to put it down very, very slowly, which is another thing most horses have trouble with, at least in the beginning, right? Yeah. And that's really important because in order for the brain to get the feedback it needs to adjust your resting tension levels, it needs feedback from the contraction. So when the horse lifts up their foot, they're contracting most of their flexor muscles to do that. And then it also needs feedback and information about the decontraction when it's allowing the flexor muscles to lengthen to put the foot back down. If we don't do that slowly enough, then it happens on autopilot, which is a different part of the brain. That's the autopilot system is in the lizard brain. Okay. It's in the unconscious part of the brain. When you do something slowly and deliberately, your frontal lobe is controlling that movement. It's specifically, if you're interested, the voluntary motor cortex. Part of the brain is what controls that slow, deliberate movement. And that's the part of the brain that then sends the information over to adjust the resting tension level. And as far as I know, and I believe as far as we know in like we study of brain sphere of knowledge at this point, the voluntary motor cortex, I believe, is the only part of the brain that can mediate muscle decontraction. There are several parts of the brain that are involved in or that can initiate a muscle contraction, so an activation or a quick movement. This part of the brain does the slow decontracting. So this work is opposite of almost everything else we do with our bodies or with our horses' bodies, right? So you do a movement and then a slow unmovement or a slow return to neutral. So in this case, it would a slow putting the hoof back down. And then you want the horse to stand their weight back on the hoof as well so that they get a complete deactivation of the picking up muscle. So that seems really simple, but it's pretty tricky to actually get your horse to do it when you can't tell them all this stuff. And when they have their whole history of either training and kind of automatic responses and then their own muscle tension and stuff. And then there are some involuntary reflexes, like we talked about in the beginning, that get triggered while doing those kind of movements. So I can give you some guidelines, and these are the main guidelines of doing equine Hanna somatics or Hanna somatics with your own body also that will help you avoid the reflexes that get in the way and make sure that you're actually using the right part of the brain so you can actually get a real change. The individual has to move their own body. With the horses, when they're learning this, you can help them a little. So as long as they start to do the pickup, you can then put your hands on their leg and help them finish the picking up a little bit because their brain still initiated it and sent the impulses down through their spinal cord, through their peripheral nerves to the particular muscles that we need. So they've got to be in charge of moving their own body. The movement should only be as far as the horse can go easily. So we're not going to go past any kind of resistance. If it was our body, we wouldn't push through pain. We don't want to even hit the end of the range of motion. So it's got to be within the easy, comfortable range of motion for that horse on that day, for that body part. So for that leg, for that particular knee joint, like you don't want it to go further than it can go easily. The slow coming out is the most important part. And we're going to actively avoid stretching. Again, opposite of almost everything else that they tell us to do. And I want to tell you why we're going to avoid stretching, because for me, knowing why we do something helps me decide if I'm going to do it or not. There is a reflex that gets triggered when we stretch muscles. It's called the stretch reflex. Have you heard of it?
No.
It's also in literature often called the myotatic reflex. If you guys want to nerd out and look it up later. Basically, the job of this reflex is to make sure that the muscle comes back to the length it started at, and it gets triggered anytime the receptors in the muscle tissue sense a stretching. So it's very hard to avoid triggering the stretch reflex when you stretch a muscle. And when you go too fast or when you go beyond the comfortable range of motion for a given movement or limb, that resistance that you feel, that's when you're starting to stretch the muscles. The best way to avoid stretching is to go real slow and to do it smaller even than we think we can. So I'll often tell people only do it 50% as far as you know you can go. Then you have a pretty good shot of not hitting the end of your range. Because once you feel that you're hitting the end, or once you're moving a horse's leg and you start to feel that resistance, you're already stretching something once you feel it. So the individual has to use their own brain to move their own body. The slow coming out is the most important part. You only go into the movement as far as is easy and comfortable for that range of motion, and you actively avoid stretch. So when you ask your horse to pick up their foot and then slowly put it back down, if you can do it within these parameters, as they slowly put it down, and there's about 16 muscles involved in picking up and putting down a hoof for a horse. Okay. All of those muscles that got contracted, when the horse puts them down, they'll be left in a slightly more relaxed state. They'll have a lowered resting tension level than when you started. Unless they had a perfect one to begin with, in which case you're not changing anything. For the most part, we and our horses are experiencing elevated baseline tension levels in many, many muscles. You don't have to know what the muscles are specifically. You don't have to know how this works in the brain and in the nervous system. If you can just do that, get the horse to pick up and slowly put down and then stand on it. And their brain was doing at least some of it, we think, right? Because this is really our best guess from the outside. You're going to achieve the results that we're after which is that the horse will have more relaxation in the muscles that it needs to both to balance and to do the movement. And because he's using his own brain, sending impulses from his brain through the neurons down to where they synapse on the muscles. And because what we know about neuroplasticity, that as soon as you use a neuron, it grows. It forms new connections. It grows new dendritic spines immediately upon use. This is the use it or lose it principle of neuroplasticity. As soon as you use a brain cell, it grows a little bit and makes more connections. As soon as you stop using it starts to atrophy. This is like the central nervous system is obsessed with efficiency. And this is one of the ways that it does that. Use it and it grows, stop using it and it atrophies. And I'm talking about neurons here. So that means that in addition to helping the horse readjust and rebalance their own resting muscle tone, we're also helping them form better brain muscle connections and have better brain muscle communication. So they're getting better at talking to the muscles and they're getting better feedback from the muscles, which means that we're helping them have better body awareness and we're helping them have more accurate body awareness because now they're getting accurate information in real time instead of from the last time that they did a pandiculation or got sensory information.
Funny because I was very close to this. You know, as I was working with my horse, I can tell that yes, if I pick up a front foot, it goes down in a very jerky way. And if I try to wait and hold it until it goes down smooth, and I can tell there's something in there, but I didn't repeat it because honestly, I just felt like I was maybe harassing the horse a little bit. Right. Well, it is he doesn't quite understand what's going on. So I do it just the once when I pick his feet out. I didn't really think because I wasn't exactly sure what was going on and what I should be doing. But I do know there is a way that I could kind of hold it that seemed to improve things. Yeah, I didn't exactly know where I was going. But I know sometimes I could get a hold of his foot and put it down in a way where he can do it smoothly.
I wouldn't worry about getting him to do it smoothly because that will be the end result.
Gotcha.
Once the tension level is normalized and once he gets better control of it. And that jerkiness that you're describing is actually really typical when we're doing the slow release or the slow coming out of a movement when we're doing Hanna Somatics, because there's two things that can cause the jerkiness. One of them is the stretch reflex is getting triggered. And so the muscle keeps recontracting a little bit on the way down. Because and that isn't necessarily on you. Either you moved too fast or the horse moved too fast because they can trigger their own stretch reflex. So that's another thing to keep in mind is when you're asking your horse to do something and they understand you and they're very willing, they might do it for you faster than you want them to and then stretch their own muscles. So it's okay if it happens. But so that could be what is causing the jerkiness you're describing. The other thing is that because we don't do a lot of slow, controlled, deliberate movement, the voluntary motor cortex part of the brain, it's out of practice at doing that. So the jerkiness could simply be that part of the brain going, oh, too much. Oop, not enough. Oh, okay, there's the ground. And then it gets the feedback. And then usually if you repeat it, and I would suggest you do these pickups 3 times with each leg. On the second repetition, there's usually less jerkiness. Sometimes by the third one, it's smooth. Or you're not going to necessarily fix everything in 3 pickups the first day, but sometimes you do. Sometimes if it's a simple 1 or 2 muscles that we're having this chronic baseline tension, it can resolve in 3 pickups the very first time you ever try this. I've seen that happen over and over. So the trick is, even in your own, I'm hearing you when you say, when I pick up his foot or when I have him do this, even just thinking about it that way makes it less likely that he's going to use his own brain to do it. You really want to train yourself to ask him to do it, even in the way you word it in your mind, because that will change how you touch him and change what you do. And then there's a little bit of a feel element here where your hands are on his leg because you've asked him to pick it up and he picked it up and then you joined him. And now you're trying to get him to put it down slow, but his leg is doing up, down, kicking around, who knows what, right? Or it's stomping down. Now you don't want to block what he does because number one, you can get hurt if you hang on to a horse's leg that's jerking around. But also if you block it, now you're resisting him and now he's doing other things and it might have just been a reflex and now you're no longer doing a pandiculation. So whatever the leg does, you try to follow it. And then when you have the opportunity, you invite it to come down slow. And then it might jerk up again. And then you invite it to come down slow. And it might go a little further, hopefully. And then a lot of times what happens, their toe touches the ground and that triggers them and it reflexes back up again. And then, so just stick with it. Hang in there as long as it feels safe. Keep your hands kind of loose is what I do. So that if the leg stomps down, it'll just pull through my fingers. And then he gets to feel that he pulled through my fingers, even though he didn't mean to stomp down. And that's how you tell him, like, I would have liked it to go slower without blocking him. So then your back doesn't get pulled, more off balance.
Gotcha.
And you didn't kind of get in the way.
So thanks for the tip about the fingers, because I was just about to ask whether maybe we should try using a tool like a pool noodle or something, but no.
No, you definitely want your hand because you want to be able to feel for the least amount of resistance or tension as you're going, because it's a pretty fine line when you have your hands on a horse's leg and you're trying to ask them to move their leg, but the only way you can ask them is by moving their leg with your hands. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So you really try to have this feeling in your hands of you're inviting and maybe a little bit guiding, but really wanting them to do it as much as possible. And then you just don't block it. It takes a little bit of practice to have that kind of feel in there, especially when we've been so conditioned to make the horse do it.
Well, that's a lot of stuff. I cannot wait to look into this. And I also cannot wait to try it. Tell us about where people can find you, and do you things remotely, and what kind of work do you do with people, or what programs do you offer?
So the easiest way to reach me and learn more about this work is through my website, which is alissamayer.com. It's ALISSAMAYER.com. I've got all my kind of online offerings there. I don't do a lot of one-on-one teaching or sessions, but I do have some limited availability just because I'm a single mom. I have twin 5-year-old human boys plus a barn full of horses.
Wow.
So I'm pretty busy with that, but I do have some. So there is a scheduler on there with some one-on-one time available. But this work, because it's so much about the first person experience or the first horse experience of using their own brain to move their own body to trigger a natural reflex, it lends itself pretty well into DIY practice. So the best way to learn for horses, we actually have an instructional video that will teach you how to take your horse through a full body session of equine Hanna Somatics that will help them self-pandiculate most of their major muscles. And that resolves, I would estimate, about 70% of the issues that people would come to me with, or that back when I had a one-on-one practice that they would be bringing in. That just what the basic intro session that we teach you in that video can resolve so many body issues, because it really helps you help your horse normalize their tension levels. And then the other thing that I noticed, and I used to also be a riding instructor, was I just got so tired of telling my students the same seat and position and things over and over and over. And the same thing happens to us that happens to our horses. So we're crooked, just like our horses are crooked. And it's our unconscious tension levels that are making us not be able to retain the stuff. Like, we all know how to ride if we've taken a few lessons. We've had the things yelled at us, or we've read the book, or we know what sitting correctly is supposed to be like. We just can't get our body to do it, or when we do, it hurts. And so when I learned about this work, I pretty much stopped teaching riding lessons and just pulled people off their horses and would guide them through a Hanna Somatic session with their own body, because then they get back on the horse and their leg is automatically longer, their hips are automatically relaxed and open, they're able to sit up straight and find their own balance. And particularly, they're able to feel where their body is in space. So they can actually do stuff on purpose instead of battle their habits all the time. So Hanna Somatics for equestrians, even with the horse out of the picture or separate from them in that moment, is a hugely valuable tool. And so I also have an intro course for doing Hanna Somatics with your own body that's available on my website. And then I have a deep dive program that I call the Posture Transformation Program, where in addition to the intro stuff, they'll actually take you through, and these are pre-recorded lessons, but take you through 8 or 10 lessons focusing on specific areas of the body so that you can get a deeper release and awareness, and to be able to pandiculate those muscles using this method. So all that stuff's available on my website, in addition to some free resources where you can get kind of a free intro to this stuff to check it out.
That all sounds very interesting and very amazing. Does this relate at all? I mean, this sounds slightly similar to Feldenkrais. Are these systems related or not related, or? Actually,
yes. They're related in that Thomas Hanna, who developed Hanna Somatic, was friends with Moshe Feldenkrais. And in fact, Thomas Hanna was a student of Moshe Feldenkrais, and he was the guy who first invited him to the US and started organizing his workshops and clinics. So they have a shared lineage. And the best way I can describe it is that Hanna Somatics is the next evolution of Feldenkrais.
Okay, cool.
Because Feldenkrais work uses a lot of, some of the language is the same, A lot of the actual exercises are really similar because, I mean, there are only so many things the human body can do.
Yeah.
And they're in the natural range of motion, right?
Mhm.
What's different is the discovery of pandiculation and doing these voluntary pandiculations. So I'm not an expert on everything Feldenkrais, but my sense and observation is that it's much more of an emphasis on the sensory experience and the awareness piece. And Hanna Somatics has those, but its all emphasis is on the motor and the brain piece. And that's what makes it, in my opinion, light years more effective, because you're training the parts of the brain that are in charge of those tension levels and using the natural reflex of pandiculation to reset them by doing the work. So it's not just the doing the exercises with your body, it's what's actually happening and how you're getting the central nervous system to reset itself.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that makes complete sense because I've worked with 2 different Feldenkrais practitioners and taken some classes. And even though I do, yes, like I have a list of instructions for certain things, but it does not circle back around. Like I have not been able to get it to feed back around and restart itself. It's very much just like if I want to walk better, like I'll have a tendency time, I'll start to trudge as opposed to, which is a tiring way to walk. So go back to the lessons that I took on walking that improved it. But it's a very discrete kind of list of kind of instructions and do this. And I have not been able to get it to feed back and provide more understanding as I'm doing it.
Yeah. The simple reason for that is you're training your performance of walking. You're not training your actual natural unconscious way of walking. That's the difference.
This has been amazing. Thank you so
thank you.
I cannot wait to take a look at your stuff. Thank you so much for joining little me and my little podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure. I love sharing this stuff because it's mind blowing that everybody doesn't know this yet. I want every single person to know this. I want them to teach this stuff in the PE programs in elementary school because this is just like, this should be in the user manual for having a body. Because it's amazing. And it works fast too. So that's the other thing. When you try this stuff, the changes in your muscle tone happen in real time as you do the exercises. So you'll get an immediate change, an immediate result.
All right.
And that's how you know that you did it slow enough and that you successfully pandiculated.
All right, that's great. Can't wait to try it with myself and with my horses. So I will definitely put the links to your website and stuff in my show notes. And thank you so much.
All right. Yeah. Let me know how it goes.
I will do. Have a good evening. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks.